She spoke Italian with a lost elderly couple. The mob boss froze and ordered, "Find out everything about her." Comment what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10 and tell me what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better. So subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The afternoon sun gilded the maple leaves that fell gently on Millennium Park, creating a natural carpet of orange and gold hues that contrasted with the grey of the urban concrete. Amelia Rossi walked hurriedly through downtown Chicago, balancing a bag of bread and the worn-out purse she had carried for 3 years, ever since she started her internship at a small translation agency. Her 21 years seemed to weigh more heavily on those autumn days, when her salary of $1,500 a month barely covered the household expenses and the medicine for her father, who suffered from arthritis in the hands that had once crafted such beautiful furniture. Her mother still sewed late into the night, and Amelia felt her heart ache every time she heard the rhythmic sound of the sewing machine echoing through their small house in Little Italy. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she almost didn't notice the elderly couple sitting on a park bench, visibly lost and distressed. Something in their expression made her stop. Perhaps it was the vulnerability stamped on their wrinkled faces, or the way they clung to each other like castaways in a stormy sea. She approached slowly, noticing they were conversing in a familiar language that her soul recognized even before her brain could process it. Italian. The Italian her nonna had taught her since she was a child, the one that flowed as naturally as English when she was at home, preparing the risotto or polenta that fed the family's body and soul. Amelia felt an instant connection with these strangers who carried in their eyes the same nostalgia she saw in her great-grandmother's eyes when she spoke of the distant land she had left behind. With a soft "scusi, posso aiutarvi," she said, seeing immediate relief wash over the elderly couple's faces. The woman, with white hair tied in a perfect bun, grabbed her hand with a surprising strength for someone her age. Joseph and Rose Marino, Amelia discovered as they talked, were staying at a downtown hotel but had gone for a walk and gotten completely lost. Their grandson was desperately looking for them, but in the confusion they had even forgotten the hotel's name. Amelia didn't hesitate. She sat down beside them and began asking questions in Italian, trying to reconstruct the path they had taken. Rose spoke with tears in her eyes about how happy she was to finally see the city where her grandson lived, but that everything was so big, so different from the small village in Sicily where she was born. Joseph, more reserved but equally emotional, held his wife's and Amelia's hands as if they were his anchor in this unfamiliar urban sea. The hours passed as they talked. Amelia called the translation agency to say she had to leave early, losing half a day's work and consequently part of her already meager salary. But she couldn't abandon these 2 old people who looked at her with such gratitude. Rose began to talk about recipes she made in Italy, and Amelia shared the ones she had learned from her great-grandmother, discovering regional similarities and differences that made them laugh. Joseph told stories of when he emigrated to the United States, of the sacrifices and the longing, and Amelia saw reflected in him the same journey her own family had undertaken. It was when the black BMW X6 braked sharply on the street next to the park that Amelia noticed the change in the air. Joseph and Rose stiffened visibly, and she felt a chill run down her spine, even before she saw the man getting out of the car with precise, controlled movements. Ethan Marino was tall, wore a suit that probably cost more than Amelia's entire wardrobe, and had dark eyes that seemed to calculate everything around him with the coldness of a predator, assessing its territory. "Nonno, nonna." His voice was tense but restrained, the Italian carrying an accent that betrayed years in America. He approached quickly, and Amelia noticed how his grandparents, who seconds before were laughing relaxed, now seemed to shrink under his gaze. There was love there. She could see, but also fear, respect, and a deep sadness she couldn't name. His gaze then fell on Amelia, and she felt as if she were being X-rayed. It wasn't admiration or romantic interest she saw in those eyes, but a calculating assessment, as if he were pricing every piece of her simple clothing, cataloguing every detail of her appearance. She lifted her chin, refusing to shrink under his scrutiny. "This young lady helped us," Rose said in Italian, her voice coming alive again as she spoke of Amelia. "She speaks our language, Ethan, and was so kind. She stayed with us all this time, talking, keeping us company. She's a ragazza di buona famiglia. You can see it in her eyes." Ethan extended his hand to Amelia with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ethan Marino, thank you for taking care of my grandparents." She shook his hand briefly, feeling the restrained strength in his grip, the skin too soft for someone who worked with his own hands. "Amelia Rossi. It was a pleasure talking with them." "Let me take you home," he said with a courtesy that sounded more like an order than an invitation. "It's the least I can do after you wasted your time with them." Amelia felt the veiled insult in that sentence, the assumption that she needed compensation, that her time with Joseph and Rose had been a sacrifice and not a gift. "I appreciate it, but it's not necessary," she replied politely but firmly. "I take the bus every day. I know the way well, and it wasn't wasted time. It was time very well spent." The genuine surprise that crossed Ethan's face for a fraction of a second was almost imperceptible, but Amelia saw it. He wasn't used to hearing no. She said goodbye to Joseph and Rose with warm hugs, promising to visit them at the hotel if they had time before they went home. Rose whispered in her ear that she was special, that she had a light in her eyes that her grandson lacked. Amelia walked to the bus stop without looking back, but feeling the weight of Ethan's gaze on her with every step. What she didn't know was that at that moment, something had irreversibly changed in the universe contained within Ethan Marino's chest. For the first time in 15 years, since he had plunged headfirst into the dark world he had chosen as his own, he felt something other than emptiness, boredom, or the cold satisfaction of power. It was an uncomfortable, almost painful sensation that followed him throughout dinner with his grandparents, where Rose couldn't stop talking about the wonderful girl who had helped them. That night, in his penthouse on the Gold Coast, surrounded by the luxury he had acquired through methods he preferred not to examine too closely, Ethan found himself thinking of brown eyes that were too honest, of a polite but firm refusal, of hands that had probably never known a manicure but had held his grandparents with genuine tenderness. He picked up the phone and called Marcus, his right-hand man. "I need you to find out everything about a woman," he said without preamble. "Amelia Rossi, everything. Family, work, friends, debts, secrets. I want to know what she eats for breakfast and what she dreams about at night." The order was clear, and Marcus, accustomed to his boss's whims and demands, just confirmed that he would have the information in 48 hours. Amelia arrived home that night to find her mother still sewing and her father trying to do exercises with his painful hands. She told them about meeting the Italian couple, instinctively omitting the part about the intimidating grandson and his overly expensive BMW. Something told her that man was danger, the kind of danger people like her should avoid at all costs. But life has a peculiar way of ignoring our self-preservation instincts. In the following days, Amelia began to notice strange coincidences. The supermarket where she shopped for her mother suddenly had a special discount on imported Italian products. The translation agency where she interned received an unexpected proposal from a major client who specifically requested her services. On the bus she took daily, she started seeing the same man in a suit who avoided her gaze but was clearly watching her. She wasn't naive. She had grown up in Little Italy. She knew the whispered stories about Italian families who did more than just make cannoli and wine. She knew how to recognize when she was being watched, and she knew exactly who was behind it. What surprised her was the anger she felt, not just at the invasion of privacy, but at the presumption that she was something that could be bought, investigated, possessed. It was with this anger still simmering that she marched to Ethan Marino's business address 3 days after meeting him, walking past the impressed receptionist and straight into his office without an appointment. Ethan was on the phone, clearly in the middle of an important negotiation, but he hung up as soon as he saw her enter. "Miss Rossi," he said with that controlled smile. "What a surprise." She closed the door behind her and planted her hands on his desk, leaning forward with her eyes flashing. "I don't know who you think you are, but I'm going to make one thing very clear, Mr. Marino. I'm not an object you can investigate, buy, or control. I appreciate the kindness with the discounts and work opportunities, but I don't need your charity, and I certainly didn't ask for your attention." Ethan leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, Amelia saw something genuine cross that handsome but cold face. It was respect, mixed with something she couldn't identify. "You're right," he said simply. "I overstepped, but I can't apologize for wanting to know more about you. I rarely meet someone who tells me no." "Maybe you need to hear no more often," she retorted, but already feeling the anger dissipate. There was something in the way he looked at her now, without the layer of calculation and power, that disarmed her. Something vulnerable that he clearly wasn't used to showing. And people are not puzzles for you to solve, or territories to conquer. The silence that followed was dense, charged with a tension Amelia couldn't name. Ethan stood up, walked around the desk, but kept a respectful distance. "Let me start over," he said, and his voice had a different quality now, softer, more human. "My grandparents won't stop talking about you. They say you have a good soul, that you're a rare find. And I," he said with a wry smile that had a touch of self-deprecation, "don't have much experience with good souls." Amelia should have left at that moment. Every survival instinct screamed at her to turn around and never look back. But there was something in that man, behind the facade of power and danger, that recognized the loneliness she herself sometimes felt in the early hours, when the weight of responsibilities seemed too much for her young shoulders. "What do you want from me?" she asked, and it wasn't an accusation, but a genuine question. Ethan took a long moment to answer, as if he himself wasn't sure. "Honestly, I don't know," he admitted, "but I'd like to find out if you'll let me. No investigations, no expensive gifts, no power games. Just," he hesitated, searching for the right words, "getting to know you." That's how it began, with a raw and unexpected honesty in a sleek office in the heart of Chicago. Amelia agreed to a coffee, just one coffee, warning that she had neither the time nor the money to waste on complicated games. Ethan accepted the terms with a seriousness she didn't expect, and they arranged to meet the following weekend at a small, simple coffee shop she chose, far from the refined places he frequented. The coffee turned into a walk through the Chicago Botanic Garden. The walk turned into another meeting. This time a simple lunch where Ethan seemed genuinely fascinated to discover that Amelia spoke not only Italian, but also French and Spanish, all self-taught through library books and online videos. She, in turn, began to see beyond the mask of power he wore, finding fragments of a man who had once been different before choices and circumstances molded him into something harder. Joseph and Rose became unwitting accomplices in this nascent romance. Before returning home, they insisted on a dinner where Amelia was present, and the way Ethan's eyes genuinely lit up when he was with his grandparents revealed layers of humanity he kept hidden from the world. The old couple told stories of when Ethan was a child, before his parents' death in an accident that changed everything, when he was a sweet boy who loved to read and dreamed of being an architect, "What happened to that boy?" Amelia asked Ethan later as they walked through the illuminated downtown streets. "He died with my parents," Ethan answered with brutal frankness. "And someone was born who learned that kindness is weakness and trust is danger." Amelia's heart tightened at that confession, and she understood she was treading on dangerous ground, not just because of what Ethan was, but because of what she was beginning to feel for him. The weeks turned into months, and the relationship between them deepened in ways that scared them both. Ethan found himself doing things he had never imagined, like showing up unexpectedly at Amelia's work just to walk with her to the bus stop, or spending hours talking about Italian literature and old movies she loved. Amelia found herself thinking of him at the most inopportune moments, missing his presence when they went days without seeing each other. But the reality of who Ethan was could not be ignored forever. The first crack in the bubble they had created came when Amelia saw, by chance, Ethan leaving a clearly business-related meeting at the kind of restaurant where she knew dangerous men made dangerous deals. He was accompanied by Marcus and other men who had that unmistakable air of living outside the law, and the way people moved away as they passed said it all. She confronted him that night when he showed up at her house with flowers, a romantic gesture that now seemed tainted by reality. "I'm not an idiot, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. "I know you're not just an ordinary businessman. I see how people react to you. I hear the whispers. I notice the contradictions. If we're going to continue whatever this is that we're doing, I need the truth." Ethan was silent for a long moment, and Amelia saw the internal battle reflected in his eyes. He could lie, she knew. He could create a convincing facade, and she would probably believe it because she wanted to believe. But he didn't lie. "My family has connections that go back generations," he said finally. "When my parents died, those connections gave me power, protection, a way to never feel vulnerable again. I started with legitimate businesses, but—" he hesitated. "I accepted opportunities that crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed." "You're a criminal," Amelia said, and it wasn't a question. "I'm many things," Ethan replied wearily. "Criminal is one of them. But with you, Amelia, with you, I remember who I used to want to be. You make me want to be better. And that terrifies me because I don't know if I'm still capable." Amelia should have ended it there. Her head screamed at her to do just that, to protect herself, to protect her family from the storm that would inevitably come if she continued to be involved with this man. But her heart, treacherous and stubborn, saw the truth in those dark eyes, saw the man who was fighting to emerge from the ashes of what he had become. "I can't save you, Ethan," she said with a firm but gentle voice, "and I won't pretend that everything is okay when it's not. But," and she made a decision that would change everything, "if you really want to be different, if you want to try to build a life away from all this, I'll be here. Not as your savior or your redemption, but as someone who believes that people can change if they really want to." It was the beginning of a painful and slow transformation. Ethan began to gradually distance himself from the dirtier operations of his businesses, delegating to trusted men while focusing on legitimate ventures. It wasn't easy, and there was resistance from all sides. Associates who saw his change as betrayal, rivals who saw his apparent weakness as an opportunity, and the power structure itself that does not easily let go of its members. Amelia's family noticed the change in their daughter, the different sparkle in her eyes, the more frequent outings, the names she avoided mentioning but that floated between the lines of every conversation. Her father, a man of few words but much observation, confronted her one night. "This man you're seeing, who is he?" Amelia didn't lie about the name and saw immediate concern wash over her father's face. "I know who he is, daughter. Everyone in Little Italy knows about the Marino family. You're playing with fire." "I know, Dad," she admitted, "but he's trying to change. He's moving away from that life." "Trying isn't the same as succeeding," her father replied with bitter wisdom. And even if he does, there's a price to pay. People like him don't get out of these things unscathed. Her mother, more pragmatic, simply asked if he treated her well, if he made her happy. Yes, Amelia answered both questions and saw the resignation mixed with fear in her mother's eyes. The relationship between Amelia and Ethan deepened despite the growing obstacles. They stole moments together whenever possible, building an intimacy that went beyond the physical, although the attraction between them was undeniable and increasingly difficult to resist. Ethan was surprisingly attentive and patient, respecting the boundaries she set, and Amelia discovered a passion in him that was both frightening and thrilling. It was on a rainy winter night that things changed irrevocably. Ethan had planned an intimate dinner in his penthouse, personally cooking dishes he had learned from his nonna in his childhood. The vulnerability of seeing him in the kitchen, trying to get the sauce seasoning right, nervously asking if it was good, broke down the last barriers Amelia had maintained. After dinner, as the rain drummed against the panoramic windows, they kissed for the first time, with the urgency of those who had been holding back for too long. What followed was a night of mutual discoveries, of tenderness mixed with passion, of words whispered in Italian that made everything more intense and real. Ethan was gentle and attentive in ways that surprised Amelia, treating her like something precious and fragile, even as she showed her own strength and desire. At dawn, lying together as the city woke up below, they both knew they had crossed a point of no return. But happiness, Amelia would learn, always comes at a price. The changes Ethan had been implementing in his business did not go unnoticed by those who had an interest in keeping him exactly where he was. Veiled threats began to arrive, warnings that he was being ungrateful to those who had helped him build his empire. He ignored them initially, confident in his power and his ability to navigate those treacherous waters. The mistake was underestimating how far his enemies were willing to go to keep him in line. One afternoon, as Amelia was leaving the translation agency, she was approached by two men who pushed her into an alley with frightening ease. They didn't hurt her physically, but the message they delivered was clear. Ethan Marino had debts to pay, loyalties to honor, and if he insisted on walking away, those he loved would pay the price. Amelia arrived home trembling, not with fear for herself, but with anger and a sudden, brutal understanding of the reality she had gotten herself into. She called Ethan immediately, and the fury in his voice when he understood what had happened was terrifying. He arrived in less than 20 minutes, storming into the small house in Little Italy like a tempest, checking every inch of her to make sure she wasn't hurt. "You're going to stop this now," Amelia said when he finally stopped examining her. "You're going to go back to that life, do what they want, because I won't be the reason you or your family get hurt." Ethan held her by the shoulders, forcing her to look into his eyes. "No," he said with a certainty she had never heard in his voice. "I won't let them use you against me, and I won't go back to being who I was. This means we have to make difficult choices, but we'll make them together." In the days that followed, Ethan took drastic measures. He met with each of his associates, making it clear that he was out, definitively out, and that any retaliation against him or Amelia would be met with full force. He liquidated assets, paid off debts, and severed ties he had spent years building. Each step was burning a bridge, closing a door that could never be reopened. Amelia's family watched everything with a mixture of admiration and terror. Her father, who had initially completely disapproved of the relationship, began to see in Ethan a man genuinely trying to redeem himself, paying a very high price for past choices. Her mother, more maternal, saw the suffering in both of them and offered what she could in terms of comfort and food, because that was how she knew to show love. Joseph and Rose, when they heard from Ethan what was happening, flew back to the United States immediately. The conversation between the grandson and his grandparents was long and painful, with truths finally being spoken about how the family had lost its way after the death of Ethan's parents, about bad choices made for good reasons, about cycles of violence and power that needed to be broken. Rose cried, Joseph held his grandson's hand tightly, and both gave their blessing to what he was doing, even knowing the risks. But leaving the world of organized crime is like trying to escape a black hole. Gravity always pulls you back. 3 months after Ethan declared he was out, Marcus showed up at his penthouse in the middle of the night, bloodied and desperate. They had sent a message, he said, through teeth clenched in pain. One of Ethan's warehouses, now technically under the management of one of his former partners, had been set on fire. 3 men were dead, and everyone knew it was a direct message. Ethan then faced the most difficult decision of his life. He could retaliate, use all the power he still held, declare war and probably win, but at the cost of completely returning to that world. Or he could swallow his pride, accept the loss, and prove definitively that he was out. Amelia found him that dawn on the penthouse terrace, looking out at the sleeping city with a tortured expression. "I know what you're thinking," she said softly, approaching him, "and I know it goes against everything you were taught to be. But revenge only breeds more revenge, Ethan. If you retaliate, it will never stop." Ethan turned to her, and Amelia saw tears for the first time in those normally so controlled eyes. "They killed people who worked for me, people with families. How can I just let it go?" "You can't bring them back," she said with firm kindness, "but you can honor them by not creating more deaths, not perpetuating the cycle. You can use the resources you have to take care of their families, ensure they aren't left helpless. And you can move on, build something new, something that saves lives instead of taking them." Ethan pulled her into a tight embrace, and she felt his body tremble with repressed emotion. The decision was made at that moment on the terrace under the faint Chicago stars. Ethan would not retaliate. He would take care of the dead men's families, pay them generously, ensure their futures were secure. And then he would do something no one expected. He would leave the city completely, start over somewhere else, far from the webs of power and violence that bound him. The news was met with disbelief on all sides. His former associates saw it as weakness and cowardice, his enemies as a victory. But those who truly knew Ethan, who saw beyond the facade, understood the monumental courage that decision required. Joseph and Rose supported him completely, even offering financial help if needed. Amelia's family, witnessing the gradual transformation of the man their daughter loved, began to accept that maybe, just maybe, love really could change people. The following months were of preparation and farewell. Ethan sold the penthouse, liquidated businesses, and cut the last ties that bound him to Chicago. Amelia resigned from the translation agency, saying goodbye to colleagues and the routine she had known for years. They chose Madison, a smaller city in Wisconsin, far enough away to start over, but close enough to visit family when needed. The move was both liberating and terrifying. Ethan invested the money he had left, after paying all moral and financial debts, into a small import-export company, completely legal and transparent. Amelia, finally free to use her talents fully, opened a small translation and interpretation office, quickly gaining a reputation for the quality of her work. Life was simpler, quieter, but infinitely richer in ways money could never buy. Joseph and Rose visited them frequently, marveling at the peace they finally saw on their grandson's face. Old Joseph once confided in Amelia that she had performed a miracle, bringing back the boy he feared he had lost forever. Amelia, with her young but deep wisdom, gently corrected that Ethan had saved himself. She had only believed he could. 2 years after the move, on a golden autumn afternoon, much like the one when they had met, Ethan asked Amelia to marry him. It wasn't grand or full of theatrics, just the two of them in the small garden of the house they shared, with a simple ring he had chosen himself, and heartfelt words that spoke of gratitude, love, and the promise of a future built on honesty and mutual respect. Amelia said yes with tears in her eyes, not because she needed a piece of paper to validate what they felt, but because the symbol represented the journey they had traveled together. The wedding was intimate, held in a small church in Madison, with only their two families present. Joseph and Rose, already very frail but radiant with happiness, blessed the union with trembling but firm hands. Amelia's parents, who had learned to love Ethan for how he loved their daughter and for the courage he had shown in changing, cried tears of joy. Amelia's mother personally sewed her daughter's dress, each stitch filled with love and hope, while her father, with his arthritic hands, managed to make a small wooden picture frame where the couple's photo would be kept. During the ceremony, when they repeated their vows in English and Italian, honoring both their roots, there wasn't a dry eye in the small congregation. Ethan, who had once been a man hardened by power and violence, promised to love, honor, and protect Amelia with a voice choked with genuine emotion. Amelia, who had always been strong but had never allowed anyone to take care of her, promised to stand by his side in joy and sorrow, in plenty and in want, because true love wasn't about grand gestures, but about daily choices of commitment and partnership. The reception after the ceremony was simple but joyful, with Italian food prepared by Rose and Amelia's mother working side by side in the kitchen, creating a fusion of Sicilian recipes and traditions from the Veneto region where her family was from. Joseph told embarrassing stories of Ethan as a child, making everyone laugh, while Amelia's father, normally so quiet, gave an emotional toast about how sometimes the best gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. When night fell and the guests had gone, Ethan and Amelia were left alone in the small garden lit only by string lights and stars. "I never imagined I could have this," Ethan said softly, pulling her closer. "A normal life. A wife who loves me not for what I can give, but for who I am. A family that accepts me despite everything. You gave me this, Amelia. We gave this to each other," she corrected, kissing him gently. "You had the courage to change. I had the courage to believe. But it was a journey we made together, Ethan. Every step, every difficult choice, every moment of doubt, together. The months and years that followed were not perfect, because real life never is. There were moments of financial difficulty when the business was slow to take off. Moments of fear when echoes of Ethan's past resurfaced in the form of news about former associates being arrested or killed. Moments of doubt about whether they had made the right choices. But through it all, they remained united, supporting each other, reminding one another of the reasons they had chosen this path. Amelia became not just a wife, but a business partner, using her language skills to expand the import-export company into international markets. Ethan, in turn, unconditionally supported her dreams, helping her build the translation office until it became a reference in the region. Together, they created a life that was a testament to the fact that real change is possible, that love can be a transformative force, that it's never too late to choose a different path. Joseph passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years after the wedding, with Rose by his side and the certainty that his grandson had finally found peace and purpose. At the funeral, Ethan cried openly, unashamed, holding Amelia's hand as he said goodbye to the man who had never given up on him even when he had given up on himself. Rose lived for 2 more years, long enough to meet the couple's first child, a girl with dark eyes and a determined spirit who was named after her. Little Rose Marino grew up hearing stories about brave great-grandparents who crossed oceans in search of a better life, about grandparents who sewed dreams into fabric and shaped hope in wood, about parents who proved that true love not only withstands storms, but emerges stronger from them. She grew up in a house where two languages flowed naturally, where Italian traditions mixed with American culture, where stories of the past were told not to glorify but to teach. Ethan, now in his 40s, was unrecognizable from the man who had once commanded a criminal empire. His hair was starting to grey, wrinkles formed around his eyes from smiling so much, and his hands, which had once held guns and signed orders of violence, now built block castles with his daughter and gently caressed his wife's face. He still woke up sometimes in the middle of the night, haunted by ghosts of the past, but Amelia was always there to remind him that that man had died and a new one had been born. Amelia, for her part, flourished in ways she had never imagined possible. She was no longer just the humble girl from Little Italy, struggling to survive, but a fulfilled woman, a successful entrepreneur, a beloved wife, and a dedicated mother. But she never forgot her roots, regularly visiting her parents, who now lived more comfortably thanks to the discreet but firm help she and Ethan provided, still volunteering with the elderly, teaching Italian for free to young people in the community. On quiet nights, when little Rose was asleep and they were alone on the porch of the house they had built together, Ethan and Amelia would sometimes reflect on the unlikely journey that had brought them there. "It started with two old people lost in a park," Amelia would say with a smile. "It started with you refusing to accept my ride," Ethan would correct, pulling her closer. "It started with a choice," they would agree, "the choice to see beyond appearances, to believe in possibilities, to fight for something better." The story of Ethan and Amelia was not a fairy tale where love conquers all easily. It was something more real and therefore more powerful, a narrative of imperfect people making brave choices, of mistakes acknowledged and corrected, of forgiveness given and received, of painful but essential growth. It was living proof that redemption is not a single moment, but a series of daily decisions, that true love does not ignore flaws, but confronts them together, that it is never too late to become who you were born to be. And as the city of Madison slept around them, illuminated by stars that silently witnessed the story of love and transformation that had unfolded, Ethan kissed Amelia with the tenderness of someone who has finally found his safe harbor, his redemption, his reason to be better. She returned the kiss with the certainty of one who had chosen wisely, who had bet on the human potential for change and won, who understood that the best love stories are not about perfection, but about two imperfect people choosing every day to build something beautiful together. And so, under the starry sky of the Midwest, far from the spotlights and glamour, but close to everything that truly mattered, they continued to write their story, not in chapters, but in moments lived fully. Not in grand gestures, but in small daily tendernesses, not seeking a happy ending, but creating a happy life, one day at a time, together. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.